have in mind on the violent option front, namely Taiwan. A retired U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel by the name of莱拉里, another member of our Committee on the Present Danger, China, a man who has spent much of his life after he left the service in the Far East, focused on the Chinese order of battle and preparations to wield it against Taiwan. He has done so formally as a Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Taiwan fellow and also as a visiting scholar at the National Tsinghua University, its National Defense University. He is these days a visiting researcher at the Institute for National Defense and Security Research. Among other things, he's going to introduce, we love acronyms here, of course, the term CRINC, which stands for this aggregation of serious bad actors: Communist China, of course, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. We had a chance to visit with him also at Securing America. I hope you will please take advantage of the resources that are available on all of those programs. We do them every day at Real America's Voice. You can follow them most easily at securingamerica.substack.com. Let's go to the video with German now.
The topic I'm going to cover is focused on a Taiwanese perspective of what's going on with Xi and his gang of other conspirators against the United States. What I want to focus in on is Xi Jinping's speech at the parade, the contents of it, and a few other aspects that are related to that. So the first thing I'd like to mention is irony. The irony of Xi Jinping speaking about that he wants peace and that it's a wonderful thing, it's an important thing, all the while he's showing off his military hardware with precision and almost Nazi-like display with his goose-stepping soldiers, reminiscent of the Nazi marching routine. Here was one of the quotes that he says: "Only when all countries and nations treat each other as equals, coexist in peace and support each other, can uphold common security, eradicate the root cause of war, and prevent the recurrence of historical tragedies." That, to him, is important to say in a military parade. It's ironic because the only country in Asia that's not following his guidance is China. He is not treating other countries as equals. China has been acting like a bully for quite a while, at least 3 decades. They do not treat other countries as equals. They treat them as vassal states, much like the previous Chinese emperors have done for 500 years, causing these countries to be humiliated by China. He talks about coexist in peace. So let's take a look at some of the things that China has been doing the last few years. Conducting sabotage against fiber optic cables, ramming Filipino ships, using lasers against U.S. and allied aircraft, threatening to annex Taiwan. This is not peaceful. It is warlike. And the CCP will not stop with Taiwan. I suspect that their hateful rhetoric against Japan will also lead to violence against Japan. This is not peaceful behavior. In fact, it is dangerous and could spark war, the opposite of peace. That's why it's ironic. He talks about support each other. The CCP wants all countries to comply with whatever they want, destroying traditional fishing areas of local fishermen, building up illegal islands into military fortresses. This is not supporting each other. And he talks about preventing historical tragedies. The CCP's actions are, in fact, going to lead to tragedies, massive tragedies. He also said during his speech in 2010, a similar kind of quote: "The Chinese people love peace." It's just ironic that he's talking about peace in a military parade. The second highlight I'd like to make is that he says the 80th anniversary of the victory of the Chinese people's war of resistance against Japanese aggression and the world anti-fascist war. So notice, for example, he doesn't refer to imperial Japanese aggression. He talks about Japanese aggression. And this is important because He is continuing to point to Japan as being aggressive even after 80 years the war is over and Japan has been peaceful and has moved on, just like Nazi Germany has moved on to Germany and is not Nazi. She doesn't want to acknowledge that the Chinese war against Imperial Japan was mostly fought by the Chinese nationalist forces under the KMT, not by the communists. In fact, there are two important historical notes that I'd like to point out about this important note. When the Imperial Japanese delegation surrendered on the USS Missouri, there were two Chinese officers on board, and one of them signed the instruments of surrender of Japan on 2nd September 1945. One was General Xu Yongchang, who was Chiang Kai-shek's senior military advisor during World War II in China, who spoke no English. The second person on the bridge of the USS Missouri, or the flat area of the USS Missouri where they was signed, was Colonel Zhang Ji. He was China's military representative to the U.S. military. Specifically, he worked for General MacArthur's staff during World War II. Additionally, he was the 7th Chinese officer to graduate from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point in 1932. So after the signing ceremony started off with the Japanese delegation, they signed first. There were several of them that signed. Then the next group of people were the Allies, starting off with General MacArthur, General Nimitz, and then the Chinese general, General Yongchang. He signed for China. And the reason why he signed as the third was in recognition of the amount of people that died in China and the military forces that fought against Imperial Japan. They lost a lot of people. So this was a recognition of the central role that the Chinese nationalist forces played in World War II. I want to make a third point, is that Xi Jinping claims that China won the war against Japan. He says 80 years ago, the Chinese people thoroughly defeated the Japanese militarist aggressors after fighting a bitter and heroic war of resistance for 14 years. Yeah, the Chinese people fought for 14 years. The Chinese Communist Party was really a small part of it. And just to be clear, the communist forces mainly conducted guerrilla warfare against the Japanese, not force on force. The last thing I'd like to mention is the threats to Taiwan in Xi Jinping's speech. He did not mention Taiwan directly, but what he did mention several times was the code word rejuvenation. He said it at least 4 times. According to Xi Jinping, the PRC cannot achieve rejuvenation of China without the annexation of Taiwan. So he says the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation is unstoppable, meaning the annexation of Taiwan is unstoppable. He's calling on the People's Liberation Army to provide strategic support for national rejuvenation. Code word, the PLA will be involved in attacking Taiwan. And he exhorted the Chinese people to advance national rejuvenation on all fronts through Chinese modernization. In other references to Taiwan that were quoted, he wanted to emphasize sovereignty. Xi vowed to safeguard, quote, national sovereignty and territorial integrity, unquote, and is considered to be a reference to annexation of Taiwan. And he mentioned the role of the military is, in the People's Liberation Army, is to defend the country's sovereignty and unity. Again, reinforcing the idea that he intends to use the military to take Taiwan. My final point is, let's talk about the Soviet Union during World War II and set the record straight. With respect to the Soviets, remember that in 1939, Nazi Germany and the Soviets were allies, and they both invaded Poland, which started World War II in Europe. In August 1939, the Soviet Union signed a non-aggression pact with Nazi Germany, which included a secret protocol that divided Eastern Europe into Nazi and Soviet spheres of influence, anticipating potential, quote, territorial and political rearrangements of these countries. As I mentioned, the Nazis invaded Poland on 1 September 1939, starting World War II. The Soviets invaded Eastern Poland on 17 September. Following the Winter War with Finland, the Soviets were ceded territories by Finland. This was followed by annexations of the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and parts of Romania. On 22 June 1941, 2 years later, almost 2 years later, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, an invasion of the Soviet Union, thus ending their alliance. So for 2 years, the Soviet Union was part of the Axis, not a part of the Allies. And additionally, during World War II, Russia, the Soviet Union, signed a non-aggression pact with Japan in April of 1941. So they also were not involved in the war against Imperial Japan for most of the war. That allowed Stalin to focus on the attack from Germany. The Soviets weren't such a great power in World War II, where they sided with the Nazis and then they told the Imperial Japanese that they would not fight against them. The only country that fought both the Nazis and the Imperial Japanese was the United States. And that's an important role that China can't claim. So hopefully I've brought up some interesting points and made the record straight and made you aware of the threatening language that Xi Jinping has used against Taiwan. Again, thanks for the opportunity. I wish you well.
You did do all of that and more. Colonel, thank you so much for your contributions to the program. I want to emphasize something you touched on in passing at the very beginning, a conspiracy. And I don't think you actually used the term crinks in this conversation we did in our interview with you previously. This conspiracy is a term that was introduced to describe what